What the? Gibbons, you can't just leave the camera rolling like that. Gibbons? Oh shit! Hi guys, so before we get into it, I will quickly allay your fears about spoilers. It's my intention that there won't be any, but you may still learn one or two things you didn't want to know. Enter at your own risk, as I like to say. So over the course of about 3 nights, I think, I watched the new Terminator Netflix anime show. I don't watch a lot of anime. In fact, it's usually only when an existing franchise that I really like crosses into anime that I will then watch it. So, for example, Resident Evil has a long history now of doing animated movies and TV shows, and I will always watch those because I like the Resident Evil games and movies. And it's the same with this new Terminator show. I've loved the Terminator series since childhood, so I was always likely to check this out. And it will probably be the same when the new Tomb Raider anime releases in October. But I can't think of a time when I've checked out a brand new anime that isn't connected to an existing franchise. I went through a period where I was watching things like Spirited Away and that kind of style of anime movie, but it was a very brief thing from what I can remember. Howl's Moving Castle was another one I watched once, which was pretty good. But this Terminator show, I had been sort of looking forward to it for a while, albeit I didn't do much research on it. I didn't even know until I put it on that it was going to be set in Japan and actually spoken in Japanese with English subtitles. I think you might be able to change the settings to get an English voiceover if that's your preference, but not for me. I was quite happy with the subtitles. So the plot is sort of a rehash of the original Terminator movie. So we get a Terminator sent back through time, a T-800, the original Arnie model, being sent to Tokyo just before Judgment Day, and the rebels managed to get a soldier to go back to try and combat that Terminator. The target is some kind of Japanese industrialist who has come up with a dangerous piece of tech that might be a big threat to Skynet in the future. But if you're worried that this entire show will just be this basic chase spread out over 4 hours, because that's how long this show is, because there's 8 episodes and each one is half an hour, you would be wrong about that, because it's not just that. Similar to Terminator 2, we do get a break in the action where other plots come into play. Certain things happen that lead us down different avenues, and there are little periods in this show where we don't even see the main Terminator for quite a long time. So this whole thing isn't just Terminator 1 regurgitated and set in Japan. There are a lot of other interesting plot ideas that we come across throughout the 8 episodes. And if you're thinking at this point that this is actually just a reboot of American Terminator, wrong again, because all this takes place at the same time as all those American films did, or at least it takes place in the same universe, not necessarily at the same point in time. Like, I was a little bit confused during episode 1 because it's just a collection of random scenes to begin with, like scenes in Tokyo before Judgment Day, scenes in the future, different parts of the future, and I was thinking, where is this plot going? And it was only at the end of episode 1 that it becomes clear that it's going to be a case of Terminator and man go back through time, and you get the whole chase things starting up again. But there ended up being way more to this than what I thought there was going to be after 1 episode. Lots of like new ideas thrown into the mix, lots of plot complications that don't necessarily involve the main Terminator. One thing I always worry about when it comes to anime is how realistic will it be. You know, I don't want to see characters jumping 10 feet in the air and spinning around as if the laws of physics no longer apply. I like my action grounded and realistic, and that's part of the reason why I've always been a big fan of Terminator, because within the established sandbox of it all, it does play very realistic, I think, at least until you get to Terminator Genesis, and then we have like a megapixel Terminator, but let's not talk about that. But the opening scene in this TV show did worry me, because the action was a little bit, well, let's say it was pushing the boundaries of what's possible. So we start off with a scene in the future where a Terminator is chasing a young woman. We don't have any context for this. It's a similar scene to that one from the original movie when an infiltrator unit breaks into the rebel camp and just starts mowing everybody down with this huge cannon, and Reese drops his photograph into the fire. That whole scene. But in the opening scene from this show, there comes a point where this woman enters this huge vat area and she gets like a rope out, attaches it to a belt, and suddenly she's doing parkour around the walls and leaping off platforms, and the Terminator jumps on her leg at one point, and I'm thinking, okay, how is the Terminator not just pulling her off this thing because of the added weight? You know, I had huge problems with this whole scene, and I thought to myself, is the entire show just going to be like this? But thankfully it's not. Like, once you get past this opening scene, it's a very grounded show where all the action set pieces are perfectly believable, as if it was just a normal live action film. I think they just decided to go big with the first 2 or 3 minutes, completely wow you with something so that your attention is grabbed, but they've just gone a little bit too far. But the opening is not without its positives, because another thing I was worried about coming into this is that it would be all PG-13 and it would have more of a young adult feel with it being animation, but not the case. Right from the off in this, you can see like blood splattered all over these lockers, and there's certainly plenty of violence and nasty things happening as you go through the episodes. Lots of uses of the F-bomb as well. This could easily have got like an 18 certificate in days gone by. The fact that the whole thing is set in Japan did make me reevaluate the whole storyline across the Terminator franchise, because one thing I've always assumed about Judgment Day is that when it happens, the whole world goes to shit in an instant. Everybody just bombs the hell out of each other, and nowhere in the world is spared. But that's clearly not the case, at least if you go by what happens in this show, because post-Judgment Day, Japan is still operating as a normal society, albeit it has a massive AI robot problem, as you'll discover when you're watching the show. But it's not like the country has been completely nuked like America has, and I'm guessing Russia and China and all those countries that have nuclear arsenals at their disposal. So the fact that we have this show now does make me think differently of the movies. I'm going to picture those movies next time I watch them as, you know, there are problems happening in these mega countries, but everywhere in the world, you know, the smaller places that don't have access to nuclear weapons, they might actually be all right for quite a few more years until Skynet gets around to taking those countries over as well. I did wonder whether events in this show could influence events from the movies. So I thought, okay, so if the Terminator going back in time to Japan, if he succeeds, does that mean that the timelines in America might get affected, or is everything that happens in Japan completely independent from America? I don't know, but it's not like this story in Japan is happening completely independently of the movies, because there are constant references to Skynet and the fact that Judgment Day has happened in America and there's all these problems over there. You know, it just so happens that we don't actually go and look at what's happening in America. We never leave Japan from our point of view watching this show. I don't know if they weren't allowed to involve characters and places from the movies, or maybe they were just a little bit afraid to, in case it incurred the wrath of certain fans. I don't know. If there were more seasons of this, maybe that's something they could look to change, go out into the world a little bit, especially if all this is supposedly interlinked in the same universe. But for now, this is just a self-contained sort of set of circumstances in Japan, playing out over a long period of time. A couple more things to warn you about when it comes to Terminator Zero. So firstly, the guy who's been targeted for termination, he owns this huge company in Tokyo, and the main building has got huge fences around the outside, loads of guards. It's probably the sort of place where you need a retina scan for every single door you go through, you know, because they're guarding lots of expensive AI. But when the Terminator rolls up to this place and you can see him sort of evaluating the whole place, we switch to his infrared vision for a second, and a message pops up that says something like, infiltration would be extremely difficult, or something like that, which is really funny, especially as he then sort of just walks away without even trying to get in. But then he decides to go after the guy's kids as an alternative. But what this means is that this industrialist character just stays holed up in his compound for like most of the episodes, because it makes no sense for him to go outside of the walls, sort of thing. But we still have lots of scenes with him anyway, because he likes to chat with the main AI mainframe inside the building, and they just talk about loads of random things, spiritual things, stuff to do with the future of mankind, conversations about why computers don't like men and stuff like that. And it's kind of interesting at first, but after a while it starts to really grate on me. I mean, you could take a lot of these conversational scenes out of the whole thing, and you could probably reduce the episode count from 8 to a more leaner 7, possibly. Speaking of this guy's kids, there seems to be a lot of plot armor for the kids in this. There are a few times when the Terminator takes kids hostage instead of just killing them, and you'll wonder a little bit at that. If you're going to have a show with lots of teenage characters and kids, it's probably best to at least kill one of them quite violently at some point, just to get the message across that could happen to other characters. Think of the start of It, when the kid gets pulled into the drain. After that moment, I've got no doubt that any one of the losers in the circle of 7 could be killed by the clown at any point, but that doesn't really happen in Terminator Zero. But I do want to finish off with a couple of positives. So firstly, there's at least one really good character who I like in this. She starts out as a nanny, and you think she's going to be a really inconsequential person to the plot, but then she becomes really important, and there are a lot of interesting revelations about this particular woman. The soldier who comes back from the future is also a woman, but I thought she was a man for like the first 2 episodes, because they've made her really tomboyish, with a short hairdo, and her voice is a little bit masculine. So I genuinely thought it was a bloke for like 2 episodes, and then there's a reference to her being a woman, and I thought, oh, and I looked a bit more closely, and I thought, I guess it could be a woman. But aside from that, I did like the character. It's just weird that I got the sex wrong of this person for like 2 episodes. And there's one more cool thing about the show in overall, and that's the treatment of, or the use of tech, I should say, because this show doesn't try to invent lots of new and ridiculous Terminators. So if you think of the T-1000 from Terminator 2, you can't really take the concept of a robot much further than that. They tried with Terminator 3, with the female Terminator. They made it so that she could create bombs and guns and things. It was like the T-1000 enhanced, wasn't it? But they were struggling at that point to come up with a new, really tough new Terminator. But one thing I like about T3 is when you get to the Skynet buildings near the end, you get to see a lot of the really early Terminators, like the really crap robots that are just really rubbish, like that Ed 209 from RoboCop, that sort of thing. And you get a lot of that in this show. So there's all these like AI armies of machines in like 1997. They look awful, and they're not as tough as even the T-800, but there's a believability about these robots that you don't get with things like the T-1000 and anything beyond that. So I like the fact that this show sort of took the tech backwards rather than forwards. That was one really cool thing about it. So normally at this point of the review, I would show you what home media I own for this, but I don't have a copy of Terminator Zero. It could be one of those things that just stays permanently on Netflix and never gets a home release, who knows. As to whether I would buy it and add it to my Terminator collection, I don't know at this point. I'm honestly not sure, so there's no point addressing the issue much further. But we can go to the Bag of Terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this, so let's do that. So we got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. I enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun, albeit it does feel very inessential, so I guess make your own mind up. But it doesn't take that long to get through. We're not talking 22 episodes of 45 minutes. It's not a commitment to get through this. Like I said, I did it in 3 days. It felt like nothing, in all honesty. The 3.5, 4 hours passed quite quickly for me. So we'll wrap it up there for today, unless you want to stay an extra minute for my reading update. So since my last review, I have now finished Alien Isolation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a good adaptation. The author has skipped over a few things from the game, which is a little bit frustrating, but I think if you were going to do everything in the game, this book would have ended up twice the size. But for what it is, I still really liked it, I've got to say. So I've now moved back to Stephen King. So I think I'm going to alternate for a while between Aliens and Stephen King. So now I'm on The Stand. An absolutely huge book. I have read it before. It is brilliant. Possibly actually Stephen King's best novel. I don't know. But honestly, since I started rereading this the other night, the whole thing has just been going down my throat like water. Honestly, I'm already on page 384, and I hadn't even started it when I released my previous film review. So I'm absolutely loving this. It's really addictive. I mean, the one before this, The Shining, brilliant piece of literature, but it's not addictive in the same way that this is. This is fantastic, and I definitely think I'm going to buy the TV shows for this once I'm done. But anyway, that is my reading update for today. So I guess I will bid you all farewell. Until next time, cheerio.